Kyle, welcome to the show. You wrote the best-selling book, Begin with We. You were a number one Amazon bestseller in 9 different categories at one point. And before we dive into the nuances of the book, I wanted to start off with something interesting.
Yeah.
So in your book, you said many companies operate in an environment that fosters insecurity and fear instead of creativity and innovation. You also said that sometimes the "this is how we've always done it" DNA runs way too deep within the company.
Yeah.
Now, on your episode with Richard Schuster, you mentioned that your teams used to fear you. They used to call you the shredder because you used to pick apart the tiniest of details in people's presentations and the nuances, etc.
Yeah.
So, given what you know now, looking back at yourself and how you used to be, what are some of the biggest mistakes you feel like you made looking back and you're kind of like, dang, if only I knew at that time?
Hey, Elon, before we started, you said we only had an hour, so I don't know how we're gonna get through this list of of uglies. Well, first of all, man, thank you for having me. I
Of course.
appreciate the opportunity. A lot of respect for what you do, especially as consistently as you've done. I think you mentioned 150 episodes, dude. That's really impressive. So,
Thank you.
thanks for the opportunity to join you on your show. But in all seriousness, the that list is a long one, and I think it's probably mostly categorized within this one bucket that is really it should be labeled ego. Um, so I needed to be the smartest guy in the room. I had to have the most well articulated thoughts. I had to be the guy that was right, usually the loudest voice in the room. And I always kind of prioritized my own growth, my accolades, my next promotion, my bonus, all those things over those around me. And I don't want to bullshit your audience. Like it works. It can work. And it did for me for a long, long time. But the trade-off and where I ended up with this overwhelming sense of apathy um, is kind of what sent me off on this journey that I'm on now. But the point I'm trying to make though is you can find success leading in a way that is less than collaborative, and it's a me focus versus a we focus, and it's kind of inward. Um, but you lose out on the opportunity for connection with others, fulfillment. Um, and we lose our sense of kind of like passion for the work that we do because our work becomes transactional and becomes less relationship driven and more X's and O's driven and less human. And for me, I led that way because I was so the first 20 years of my career. And I think I'm in kind of a unique position because I discovered a different way of leading 20 years into my 30-year career in big corporate America. At the time, I was leading, I think, 15,000 people when I kind of made this intentional shift away from those mistakes. And the reason I'm so passionate about what I do now and why I love your question is, and again, if I'm being honest, it can work. It has a shelf life, and it leaves you in a place that is, at least me, and I think from many of my colleagues that have been open enough to share their experiences, um, you just miss out on a whole lot. And I want to just circle back to a comment you made, which is true. When I started to go through this series of self-reflection, like, am I the leader I always wanted to be? Do I have the purpose that I started my career with? Where did that optimism and eagerness go that I brought to my work right out of high school when I first got into the corporate world? Um, I when I started that bit of self-reflection, it's when I started to realize you can have all those same successful kind of years and accolades, check all those those individual success criteria that you set for you can still have all that level of success that I had, which I think by most standards is I think is objectively there. Um, but boy, when you do it the right way, the way that I've kind of tried to do it the last 10 years, the fulfillment that comes with approaching your work that way is so profound. And it's this cycle, man. It fuels you to keep going and doing the things the right way instead of kind of using those around you, especially those that report to you, as tools or means to an end. You actually collaborate with them on their own growth and development, and everybody wins. And it took me 20 years to find that.
Yeah. Kyle, that's an amazing answer. You kind of mentioned a little bit about me-oriented versus we-oriented. I remember reading in your book, you said that a boss is me-oriented while a leader is we-oriented. Do you
Yeah.
think that looking back on it at the time, you were
Yeah.
more me-oriented?
100%. 100%. Yeah. And there was this moment for me that I had an epiphany. It sincerely and genuinely happened one night. I had just taken a new role in a new organization that would require me to lead about 15,000 people. And throughout the interview process, I realized there was an opportunity for a bit of a cultural reset. The team wasn't dysfunctional or toxic by any mean, but not as high performing and not as um, not excellent by any means. And it was the night before I was going to meet with the top 40 or 50 leaders of my new organization that I just started to play all these scenarios for the previous 20 years of my career. Really ugly scenarios of bosses treating me in ways that left me feeling less than valued, left me feeling like a means to an end or a tool to help their own advancement. And as I thought through each of these scenarios, at the end of every one of those replays was like, well, we ain't going to do that. That's not who we are. I'm not going to lead a team like that. And I used to perpetuate it. So I made a decision that night, and then I juxtaposed those negative kind of experiences with the few bosses that I was really fortunate to be associated with that inspired me, maybe saw things in me that I didn't see in myself, gave me opportunities that I maybe wasn't ready for, but showed interest in my growth. And I thought, well, yeah, that's how we're going to be. We are going to be that way. And as these thoughts came flooding in, I was just typing, man. And I had these 10 sentences and they each began with the word we. So I'm not super creative. I now have the 10 we's. And that was the beginning of a massive, massive change, not just in my professional life, but establishing my standards for excellence in and outside of the workplace has led me down a path that I didn't know existed. And it's really all about holding yourself accountable to a series of standards that even when no one's looking, you can still take pride that you're holding yourself to maybe a level above where easiness becomes the habit. This is because it's not easy. This is to holding ourselves to any standard is sounds simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah. Kyle, one of your we's is leading with examples. So you mentioned a little bit about the imposter syndrome that you were having. I remember reading that you mentioned at 25 years old, you were struggling with a lot of imposter syndrome because you were tasked with managing a team of 600 people, which is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
On the Clear Path Coaches podcast, you mentioned that imposter syndrome is a feature of self-awareness, which I thought was very interesting.
Mm.
As far as leading with examples goes, do you need to act like a good leader before you become a good leader?
Wow, great question. Short answer is no. I am a firm believer that fake it till you make it is a recipe for disaster because it also has a shelf life. And I just happen to believe, and I think most humans would agree with this, authenticity absolutely out trumps the boss that seems to know it all or the boss that seems to act versus be real. So yeah, I would much rather, I'd rather report to someone. I'd rather have a boss that says, I don't know, Kyle, what do you think? Versus telling me their best guess or acting as if they have all the answers.
Yeah.
Look, man, at the end of the day, we all report to humans, right? I'm a leader who leads humans. I'm led by humans. And within that kind of connection or theoretical connection, there's this opportunity for us to be authentic and relatable, which I think are the two biggest foundational elements to trust. And if we want our teams to trust us, if we want those that we lead to trust us and vice versa, I think the fastest way to get there is by being relatable and being authentic. And when we act like we're something that we're not or portray this facade of boss perfection that we think is needed, our teams see that. And when they see us being inauthentic and kind of carrying this veil of perfection that we try to promote, they see that. And it's hard for them to get behind and trust us because they know it's inauthentic.
Yeah. You mentioned something really interesting, and I think this relates to what you were talking about in the beginning, that you had an ego before when you were leading people, or I guess being a boss from your perspective.
Yeah.
So you mentioned
very new, by the way, very nuanced difference that you just mentioned. You glossed over it, but it's really true. I'm glad you picked up on that.
Yeah, yeah. So you admitted the idea of you would rather have somebody, a boss, tell you, I guess, or a leader tell you, I don't know, Kyle, what do you think?
Mm-hmm.
I'm in a business fraternity on campus, and one of the things that we have to do is we have to interview all of the members, or I guess they have to interview us. They kind of just come up with 8 different questions. It's pretty cool process. And I was talking to this one guy today, and he said, what is one thing that you wish more people knew about you, right? I thought it was an interesting question, so I thought about it. And my answer was, and I don't want to, this is not related to ego, but I'm saying, like, compared to the other people in my business, right? Like, I have this podcast I've been doing consistently. I've wrote a book, and some people kind of just aren't as passionate about what they do, whatever it is, right? Everyone's got their own way of doing things. But long story short, my answer to that question of what is something most people don't know about you is I told them, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm kind of just figuring it out as I go, right? So to you as a good leader, is that part of what can make somebody good in their position and drop their ego is admitting, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to figure it out as I go.
Brilliantly said. Dude, if we can agree, at least loosely, that ego stands in the way of being a really impactful leader that people rally behind, rally with, they trust, if that is the barrier to being a really impactful leader, then absolutely. It is again, man, it's like think of your any relationship outside of a work environment, right? You want the person to be authentic. You want them to tell you the truth. Even if you don't like it, you want to hear what, you don't want to be pandered to. For some reason, when we step in the workplace, some of those kind of like common relationship um, characteristics or approaches, they're just lost.
Yeah,
So yeah, man, I would much rather have somebody that says, I just don't know, because out of that comes a sense of relatability that I don't have all the answers. I know you don't have all the answers, but I mean, theoretically, two of us together could figure this out much faster than one of us could. So I just think that level of transparency that, you know, um, I think it promotes an open dialogue. I know it promotes an open dialogue and it allows the best ideas to surface, even the dissenting ideas about whatever topic we're on, which I think is an opportunity for improvement. Anytime we recognize something's not optimal, well, we want to know that, and we only know that if someone has the courage to share that, and that doesn't happen if the boss is the only one allowed to have an opinion.
I love that. This is something that totally relates to me because as somebody who's graduating soon, going to go out in the workforce,
Hell
that's
yeah.
something that I see with the corporate cult, where people say corporate talk, corporate culture.
Yep.
It's something that drains every being of me out of me. It's the worst thing ever.
Good.
You mentioned that it seems like when people get in these work environments, all of their forms of how they like to be spoken to, how they like to have conversations goes right out the window.
Yeah.
And in your book, you mentioned that most corporate dysfunction is not a strategy problem, but a leadership character problem. So do you think given the right leader in charge, those dynamics of how we communicate can change?
Yes, I do think that, but let me put it this way: as long as your communication style is authentic to you as the communicator, then we're better off.
Mm,
100%. I like to say it this way. We have two vocabularies, which I don't think a lot of people consider. We have our work vocabulary and we have the out of work vocabulary. And I'm not talking about swear words or anything inappropriate. What I'm saying is, well, unless I don't know that anybody ever comes home after a long day and looks at their significant other and says, "Hey, how'd you do on your deliverables today?" Right? It doesn't happen. It's like,
yeah,
and then the other person doesn't say, "Well, can we put that in the parking lot? We'll circle back." Like nobody
it's,
talks this
it's
way,
funny.
right? Nobody talks this way. So I just think the more we can relate to each other as humans, the better chance we have of delivering excellent products or services, whatever we're in the business to do. It's when an imposter syndrome that you mentioned can be a big driver of this as well. But I think it's ultimately an ego thing that as soon as we're promoted into some type of position of authority, we feel as if we need to act differently, speak differently, maybe even dress differently. And if we're within an organization that, let's say you and I are on the same team, I get promoted, and the next day I'm speaking differently, or the next day I'm dressed differently, and now you report to me. How seriously are you going to take me? Because I didn't change as a human overnight, but we somehow psychologically we feel as if we got to fit this certain mold. And brother, let me tell you, I worked hard to fit in that mold for a long, long time. And I've just come to this point in my career now where I think the authenticity, me being me, my genuine me is much more, I don't mean to imply likable, but I think it's much more effective because I'm not dancing around trying to sound smarter than I am. Tell somebody I don't know if I don't know. I mean, why not? And then that just opens the door for people to step forward and kind of give their best because I'm not crowding them and telling them how things are supposed to be. I want it to be a collaborative experience.
I remember I was in the car with my friends and they told me to put on some music. And so I found this random playlist because I was a little bit embarrassed to like the music I listened to and I wasn't sure if they liked it. And this is a while ago. And I put on this playlist and my friend's like, yeah, oh, I like your music. But it didn't feel so much like a compliment because I knew that it wasn't really me. And then fast forward a couple of years,
Mm.
I was listening to my own playlist and my friend just happened to get in the car. I didn't think much of it. And then he was listening to my music and he was like, oh, dude, like this is a great song. And I remember I felt it to my core. I was like, oh my God, like this is so cool. So you mentioned how
Connection.
people will change after a promotion, right? They'll start
Yeah.
using different
Yeah.
words, they'll start dressing differently
Mhm.
because they're of
Mhm.
a higher status or whatever that thing is.
Mhm. Mhm.
Do you think that sometimes people get incentivized to do the wrong things? So for example,
Oh, yeah.
I'll leave it to you for now and then
Well,
I'll ask my
yeah,
second
no,
question.
no. The short answer is absolutely yes. So here's what happens, and it's a cycle that happens in every single organization. And I'll use the same scenario that I started a moment ago. You and I are on a team, right? We're on the same team. Let's say we have 8 peers. It's a team of 10. And our boss, Jim, has just taken a promotion somewhere higher in the organization, but now Jim's responsible for hiring his backfill. And you and I have been really open. We have lunch a lot and we talk about, man, Jim's a jerk. We don't like working for Jim. Like we have all
Jim,
these
man.
things that we don't like about Jim. We talk about, we joke about
Mhm.
it, whatever. But Jim's gotten promoted. Now and you and I both want to promote as well. We want to take on more, do more. We want to make more money. We want to lead people. But Jim's now responsible for making that back hiring decision, the backfill, right?
Mhm.
So what happens is you and I, we go through this interview process and it's so predictable. We start to inherit the same traits and characteristics in Jim that we've talked about and loathed for years. Why? Because we want to get promoted. We want to endear ourselves to Jim. And what ultimately happens is we just carry the same bullshit leadership traits that we loathed until we get promoted. And then once we're promoted, we continue to perpetuate that bullshit behavior. And then we hire somebody who's going to do the exact same thing because we did it and they watched us do it and they saw how it worked for us. So this cycle happens, which is kind of what drives me now, man. Cause I am just so passionate about like putting a stop to that and saying, let's just be humans. We all have different reasons for being here. Some of us, it's just money, and that's okay. Some of it's a step to something else. Love that. And some of us are here for the long haul. We want to promote and do more and add value in different ways and grow with the company. But we all have our reasons for being here. And here's a stat that you may not be aware of. We work on average in the US, we work about 100,000 hours of our life.
Wow.
100,000 hours. Second only to sleep. You won't do anything else on this planet more than work aside from sleep. And I just believe so firmly if we're going to spend that much time in this one place, regardless of why we're there, because we're all there for different reasons, shouldn't we make it the best experience it can be during those hours? It doesn't have to suck. Now, I'm not naive. Not every work environment, we're going to wake up and scream and run to work and be all excited and pumped up. That's not reality. It's called work. It's not called vacation. But I do believe it's the leader's obligation, the leadership team more broadly. It's their, I don't say the company because no one's named company. No one's named corporation or
Yeah.
organization. It's a person or people. And I believe it's an absolute obligation of those that are in a position of authority, in charge, whatever you want to use inside the organization to create that environment where we can come to work and be our best without fear of, being called out because we speak a little differently or because we have a different opinion or we have a diverse perspective. That's on the leadership. That's on leadership of every organization. But this cycle that I talked about a moment ago, until someone steps in between that and says enough's enough, and it's hard. Don't get me wrong. I recognize that. I want to behave like Jim because Jim controls my raise. So I'm just going to perpetuate this behavior. But at some point, it becomes so soul sucking that we lose our identity, and that's when the fake vocabulary starts to become a thing, and we lose focus on what really matters, and that's delivering a great product or service while we're working.
Yeah. To the boss that's out there that has a big ego and he he sees himself as this guy, he dresses up in a suit and he has to be this amazing person for himself. How do you make the argument for him to put the ego to the side to be a good leader, especially when the reason that he has to be a boss is because he feels like his employees not doing a good job is more of a reflection of him as a worker?
Yeah, wow. I love how you framed that question. Well, let me. I'm going to take it from the reverse order. I'm convinced that there's a spectrum. Let's say I lead a team, and there's everyone on that team has a spectrum of either being a saboteur. Well, they show up to work just to f things up. They're just here
Mhm.
to. They just have malice in their heart. They exist, unfortunately. On the other end of that spectrum, is someone really committed to the cause, whatever the cause is, whatever we do, and everywhere in between. But every one of those people typically takes that tack. They have that approach, that paradigm because of previous experiences. So if someone on the team is an absolute jerk, I'm gonna rule out the saboteurs because that's a different topic. But for someone that's just like, and I've lived this, where you have a direct report, someone that's on your team who's just a jerk, like they're difficult, they're prickly, whatever however you want to describe it. they don't usually wake up and come to work to be that way. They've been burned by bosses in the past, and they're just living out their experiences. So if you're that boss who is self-aware enough, which is a massive ingredient to being an impactful leader, is self-awareness. If you're self-aware enough to answer the tough questions like, what's it like to be led by me? Would I want to be led by me? Or am I
Mm,
having the impact that I set out to have when I first entered the workplace? Or, do I have the passion and fulfillment that I once had when I entered the workplace? Or have I lost some of that? If you're honest enough to answer those tough questions, they're probably not going to be as flattering as you might like, which means if you want the same thing, just keep doing the same thing. But if you want to reconnect with that passion and find fulfillment and create what I call a leadership legacy, you have to do things differently. And I'm here to tell you, man, pivoting to a we-oriented leadership approach and installing the 10 we's as your standards, it's very simple, but it's not easy because it requires you to set aside that ego. For example, one of my favorites of the 10 we's is we embrace challenge. Well, that requires, I can't just say, team, go embrace challenge. I have to also live that. So when that difficult team member comes to me, or maybe they disagree, whatever the scenario is, I have to embrace that challenge. And the ego is usually what stands in the way of embracing the challenge because I'm the boss. What I say goes. What's right is right. What I say is right. Which creates this imbalance of power and creates this leadership gap. And nobody at that point tries to be their best because they know you're hovering over them and essentially won't allow it. So if you can go through the self-awareness component and have some self-reflection, answer those tough questions, and you realize you may not be having the impact that you're capable of having, then the question is, what do I do differently? And I struggled with that for a lot of years. What do I do differently? My boss didn't get it. I got a bunch of folks on a team that they don't get it. They fear me. They don't respect me. So what the hell do I do? Well, I know at this point, it starts with communicating behavioral expectations that are good for one and all, not just me, everyone on the team. And the only way the team's ever going to live it every single day, every interaction is if they see me. So it has
yeah.
to start with us. We can look around and say our team sucks or the team doesn't care, whatever you want to say. But at the end of the day, it really is the leader's responsibility to either fix that or not. And if you want to fix it, that means you got to do something different. And if the or not is your choice, then don't expect anything to be any better or change.
Yeah. You talked about one of your Wheeze, which is embracing challenges. And one of my favorite parts of your book, ironically, I have it right here, I have it highlighted. It's the very beginning. It's Theodore Roosevelt's quote. I'll
Yeah,
try to put it to the camera, but it's gonna be hard. First one. So
yeah, yeah,
you mentioned that or I guess not you, it's a quote, but it says the credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, the one doing the work, the one who's embracing those challenges. So for an
yeah,
employee that might want to embrace the challenges, but it feels like their boss only wants them to do busy work or things that aren't really helping them,
yeah.
what is a way to convince them?
It's tough, man. It's tough. The truth is, you are rarely going to be able to change your boss's behavior. Rarely. It can happen. Um, and which means someone who's in that situation, and I think I would venture to guess nearly every person who's ever had a job has been in that situation. We have to ask, we really have to decide, is this an environment that's going to allow me to be my best and position me for my next step, whatever that is, or not? And then make the decision based on that answer. And if you decide to just keep your head down and collect a paycheck, I got nothing but love for you. We got commitments. We got things we got to do. I get it. Um, but I will also say that a lot of times taking one or two steps backward, meaning you just get out of there, to take ultimately 3 or 4 steps forward is the path that's needed. Look, we've all been in these environments, right, man, where we loathe our boss, we loathe the company. We're not. It's the Sunday scaries are debilitating. Um,
The Sunday
it just
scary is
doesn't
the
have
worst.
to be that way. It's not. It's naive to think it's always going to be rainbows and unicorns, but it doesn't have to be that way. And if you sense you're having more of those days than not, you owe it to yourself, especially with that 100,000 hour number in the back of your mind. You owe it to yourself to find a spot that you really can be your best, and don't let some shitty boss be the one to stop you from being in the place that's going to allow you to be your best. Can I curse on your show?
Yeah,
Okay.
don't worry about it. So you mentioned the guy that's, just getting by. Maybe he is just there to collect a paycheck. He likes the company, it's cool, but at the end of the day, it's just work 9 to 5. He wants to go
Yeah.
back to his family.
Mhm.
So One of my favorite things about your book, if I can summarize all these complicated concepts, a lot of it is just if you preach something, you have to be the one to do it as well. This is something interesting I remember hearing Elon Musk say as well. He says he slept in his SpaceX factory for 4 hours and his employees saw it, and that way they can't say, "Oh, he's telling us to do these things, but he's not doing anything." So,
Yeah.
a lot of it is just if you want your team to be a certain way, they need to have no doubt in their mind that you're doing the thing that you are expecting of them and more. So for the person that's just getting by, right? How can we how can we promote a culture that is doing all the things we preach with people that might just be getting by? Isn't there an argument that we want all of these extraordinary high achievers in our company?
It's a really fascinating question. And I want to break it into two parts because the Elon example is a good one, but I think it leaves the wrong taste in some people's mouth. As a team member who sees their leader sleeping at the office, we are not obliged to follow that.
Okay, sure.
Right? Like if so, if you got a boss that loves sending emails at 6 in the morning, don't believe you're obliged to follow that. But
Yeah,
I get
yeah.
it. Some make it a requirement. I'm not naive to that. The distinction I'm trying to make though is it's about behavior, and it's not about grand acts of at a town hall or speaking, or where you sleep that night. It's about it's about observable behaviors like we own our mistakes or we challenge each other or we do the right thing, observable behaviors. And I learned this the hard way. I was a very do as I say, not as I do type guy for many, many years. And then when I created the principles, I would say, I think I mentioned I was leading maybe 15,000 people or so. And that group of 40 or 50 people that I exposed them to the very first day, it wasn't universally accepted. Like people were like, they didn't rally behind me. I would say half the group did. A quarter of the group was kind of wait and see. And then there was a group of people that were just obstinate. They're like, this guy's full of it. We don't believe him. Which was I think a bit frustrating for me at the time, but I was also, for whatever reason, aware enough to know that if I want them to behave in these observable ways, the 10 Wheeze, they have to see me do it. So when this group of obstinate people, and there was one in particular who I talk about a lot, and she knows I talk about her because we're great friends now. When someone is really difficult to you and you behave in a way that is contrary to the things you're espousing, the standards that you've just kind of evangelized in front of this whole group, well, of course they're not going to trust you or follow you because you're saying one thing and doing another. My point in dissecting this question into two parts is, um, if you want people to follow you, they have to see that you are not above them. Yes, maybe on an organizational chart, but the behaviors for how we do what we do, they're not negotiable. They're the same from intern to CEO. Everybody's held to the same standard. So I think that creates an environment where people are more willing to follow and hold themselves accountable because they see you are not immune to it or above it. Now, you're not going to be perfect at it, so it's important to own your mistakes and say, "Man, I blew it. I reacted too abruptly when you shared bad news with me. I should have embraced that challenge. We own our mistakes, right? I'm sorry, I blew it." So I think that's, dissecting the piece. Now back to the second part of the question, when you have this, a team member who is just there for a paycheck. Um, I don't think having someone there just for a paycheck is is a bad thing. I don't expect everybody to perform at the most optimal kind of highest and best use of their capability. But as long as that team member is delivering at the level of excellence that we need them to deliver, they're not going to get a pass on the standards, the behaviors. Like I get it. We may have a threshold of here for success and you may be right at it, or you may be right up, you may be way up here, but you don't get to behave differently just because you're
Yeah.
here for a paycheck. The truth is, we need people that are in it just for a paycheck because as you ascend in leadership and take on bigger roles inside organizations, the number of those roles gets fewer. So if everybody wanted to be at the top of that pyramid, there's going to be a lot of disappointment. We need people that are willing to just stay where they are, do what they want to do, but do it at a high level because we're not going to allow people to skate just because they don't want to promote. But my point and long-winded way of saying this, man, is I got nothing but love for the guy or the gal that are just there for the paycheck. I respect it. You got commitments, you do what you got to do, but the behavioral standards don't change. And if you think your boss might change because Well, that's a different question. I don't see that happening, but, in any case, yeah, I think it's really important to establish the level that we expect everybody to behave at. Whether you're a high performer or an average performer, you're still susceptible to these same standards. And by the way,
Yeah,
if you're a high performer and you don't live up to those standards, I don't want you. If you're a low performer and you don't live up to those standards, I don't want you, because the behavior is what really drives the outcomes. When we behave like jerks, we might deliver a great outcome, but our customers will ultimately feel it if we're dysfunctional behind the curtain. But they'll also feel it if we're really a collaborative, high functioning organization as well. So we have to be good behind the curtain before those that we serve feel it.
sure. Kyle, that's such a beautiful answer. I love that
Yeah.
so much. I think it's very realistic as well, which is something that the world needs a little bit more
Yeah.
of. So you talked about observable behaviors, which I thought was really cool. How your team has to see you doing the actual inputs. Is you're not above them. You
Yep.
you practice what you preach.
Yep.
So something that's interesting for me that's on the topic of observable versus unobservable is metrics. And
Mm.
I know I kind of keep harping on this point, but it's very interesting for me, and I think for a lot of my listeners who are younger, for people that are in school and maybe are starting to get a job, is there's this aspect of working where there's observable and unobservable metrics. So for example, somebody can say, "Yeah, why would I want my team why would I do XYZ to improve the culture when it's not gonna improve our bottom line," right? The bottom
Mm.
line is observable. It's like, "Oh, if we can get 150% of our net margins this year than last year, we've made an increase," as opposed to the person that says, "Yeah, but why would I want Elon to just be a little bit happier? He's only gonna work maybe a little bit less, but we just need that bottom line," you know? So, what do you think is when it comes to observable versus unobservable metrics? I know we talked about how we're maybe incentivizing the wrong things,
Yeah.
but how can you make the argument to a boss, a leader, that the thing that they're doing is the wrong metric they should be measuring for, from a
Yeah.
leader's point of view?
Great question, man. It's ironic because, anybody that's ever spent more than an hour with me in a work setting knows that there's probably not many people more married to metrics than me. Like, I'm a numbers nerd. I'm a data guy, and most of my decisions are made with data in hand, which I think leads people to believe that, when I'm on stage or working with a company, that I'm less focused on metrics and more focused on the touchy-feely things. And it just couldn't be further from the truth.
Interesting.
The way I approach this is, I think most organizations, when someone is welcomed to the team, we do a pretty good job training them on the X's and O's of the role, right? We tell them what the success criteria is, what the metrics need to be to stay employed, to get promoted, to get the bonus, right? We're pretty descript on those things. And most organizations, depending on the role, there's new hire training and orientation and all these things to get you prepared. But where most organizations are void, or do very little with, is setting the same level of expectations around how we do what we do, not the X's and O's, but the actual behavior. What happens when I make a mistake? What happens if I recognize that something's broken, and we need to address it and we take action? That's one of the 10 we's. So so my encouragement to leaders in any industry is, index just as hard on the behaviors required to deliver the metrics, and the metrics will somehow almost always take care of themselves. Now, a lot of organizations are too in love with metrics, and that they have this dashboard of 47 data points on it. And, it can be interpreted any number of ways, and you never really know where you stand. So I always also encourage companies to, let's land on a few set of discrete numbers that we know, that are the kind of true north, our shining star, whatever the cliche you want, but they're the success indicators for us, the real KPI. Um, So there are ways, by the way, to quantify some of these behavioral things. So, like, most performance reviews are almost always metric driven. Well, where's the component that says, you know, give two examples or three scenarios where Elon, was seen challenging someone else on the team?
Mhm.
Or if you're a leader, how many promotions were you responsible for during the past year? Like, what work are you doing to develop people on the team to take on more, do more, and grow themselves? So I don't think they're wildly independent of one another. I think one leads to another. And as I said at the top of our call, dude, you could approach your job and be militant about the metrics and be really successful. Um, you can also approach your job and be absolutely connected and committed to developing and growing those around you, and you view that as your obligation as a leader versus just your job. Um, the results will come, but the connection and the fulfillment that comes in the process of delivering those results is so inspiring, and it fuels you to do it all over and over again. It's a cycle, man. It's really, and by the way, no disrespect to you. If I was your age and had this conversation, I would think I was full of shit. I would, because metrics are what moves people. Metrics are, they are, by definition, the key performance indicator. But I'm just, after 30 years leading big teams at really big companies, I am convinced that if we focus on the person, the people first, the numbers almost always take care of themselves. That doesn't mean we don't have to fire people, by the way. It's not all rainbows and unicorns, right? But it's a lot more predictable when you lead this way.
So how can we get people to do the right thing when nobody's watching?
But if I knew the answer to that, I think you and I'd be somewhere else counting money. It's really hard. It's really, really hard. The best way to ensure it, but not guarantee it, is for them to see you doing it. Is for them to see you doing it. And what does that mean, right? So I've been in countless scenarios at this point since creating these principles where, be in a staff meeting or a one-on-one, and somebody will bring a gnarly situation that they don't have a solution for. And when your first response to that person is, well, Elon, we're going to do the right thing, right? So let's wrestle with this, right, man? Let's figure out what the right solution is. You go into those scenarios with that in mind, like, we're not going to cut corners. We're not going to do the wrong thing for our employees. And by the way, I talk about it in the book. Sometimes we have to do things that might appear to be not the right thing, laying people off, firing people, making those hard decisions. So I kind of walk the reader through what I think is as close to foolproof as possible. Is when you're facing a tough decision, the 3 C's: your client, the crew, and your company. And if you can check all 3 of those boxes, you've done the right thing. Sometimes you have to compromise and only check 2, maybe even 1 of those boxes, but we're never going to check the box that says me or I, because then we're just too biased as humans. We're too biased. We can't, when we insert what the impact of this decision has on us versus our company, client, and crew, we're too biased to really to be fair. Also, when we do focus on those 3 C's, the me and the my is almost always the benefactor of that approach as well. But dude, there's no good answer to your question. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
I wish.
One of the things that I think is the hardest for me is the fact that it feels like as companies, schools, I don't want to say a society, but people have the wrong interpretation of failure. And for you, one of your Wheeze is when you take action, failure is okay. And it's promoted. It's not a bad thing. But idleness is not. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, it's like this, man. If every team and every company, or every team in any environment, it could be the bowling team, the chess team, they're aware of things that are happening inside the team that are suboptimal, that could be better. And if we really want to create this culture of excellence and deliver up to our capability, we have to take action. That's number 4. We have to say, hey, that over there, that's a gnarly problem. And one of us needs to get after that. And it may not be me. And so if nothing else, I have to bring the situation to the boss to say, hey, boss, we could just fix this. Our customers would benefit. Maybe our employees would benefit, whatever the scenario is, but we're not going to turn a cheek to it. But the only way people will take action is if they know that if they make a mistake with that action, there's going to be somebody there to pick them up. And that's number 6. We pick each other up. They're not going to like stretch and take on difficult work or a stretch assignment or a difficult assignment unless they know that you're going to be there if it doesn't go well. But what makes it even more powerful is when people take action, they're going to make mistakes just by definition, right? If we're taking on something hard or something that's not been done before, we're not going to ace it every time. In fact, we may not ace it. We may ace it a fraction of the time that we try. But the point is, we need an environment where people say, yeah, I'm going to go chase that mistake, that opportunity. That's the taking action, because they know the boss is going to pick them up. And then when it doesn't go well, we have to be in an environment where someone can just raise their hand and say, dude, I blew it. Starting with the boss. That's one of the more profound things a leader can say to their team is, I blew it. or I made a mistake, or wow, that's on me. Those types of expressions go a long way because the team can relate to that. And we're usually the first ones to point out when they make the mistake. So when the leader leads with that, it's like, holy shit, this guy's relatable, man. I think I might be able to trust him. Um, so my point here is it's okay to take action and make a mistake. It's not okay being idle. I think every one of us, with very few exceptions, most people would agree, we don't judge people by their mistakes. We judge them by how quickly they fix it and if it ever happens again. Think about if you had a bad meal at a restaurant and you're courageous enough to call the waiter over and be like, hey man, there's a hair in this, right? The manner in which they react to that, the urgency, maybe they take it off your bill, how they react to that problem will determine how you talk about that experience.
Mm.
This happened to me once. Truly happened to me. I was at a brunch. My wife and I used to go to this Mexican place for brunch a couple times a month, and we knew people there. We knew the waiters, we knew the bartenders and stuff. And I ordered my same breakfast taco thing, and it had a dollop of sour cream in it, and there was a hair in it. And we honestly, brother, we've been to this place at this point maybe 50 times. So I called the server over. I was like, "Hey, man, can you see this?" And he was like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, let me take that." He runs back to the kitchen. About 30 seconds goes by. He brings the plate back out, and there was a finger smudge over the sour cream where they just dipped the hair out of it instead of giving me a new spoonful of sour cream.
Jeez.
So I'm not here telling you how great those tacos were. I'm telling you about the guy that botched the experience. Shit like that's going to happen, right? There'll be hair. We're going to have bad experiences. How we rally around them, react to them, and ensure it never happens again is how we're ultimately judged. And when our teams feel that, when our team knows that we can stretch and make a mistake, we're going to get picked up, and we're not going to be like beat over the head with it. People are more likely to take on the things that they would otherwise avoid.
Yeah. I love that so much. And I think it takes people like you, Kyle, that challenge the beliefs based on their experiences that end up making the biggest differences. So thank you from the bottom of my heart because
Oh,
it's
you're
so
welcome.
refreshing to hear somebody like you talk about this as far as, mistakes, understanding that the prerequisite to success is to make a mistake. Like you don't just say,
Yeah.
"Okay, I want to start this business. I want to get an A on this exam." Like you've got to miss some questions, all these things
Yeah.
in order for you to eventually get up there. And even like on my website, I have a list of a bunch of failures that I had because I don't want
Oh, I
people
love
to
that.
see. I don't want people to see like me like with a suit and I have all this like fancy things. It's like, listen, I'm a human too. And like I'll even say this on the air. I have no problem admitting it. But like the first time I tried recording this, I said the wrong name to your book that I've been studying for 2 to 3 weeks that you were kind enough to send to me, you know? So it's like
Yeah.
and it sucks because it's embarrassing and failures are bad, but I feel like when we start seeing failures not only as bad, but as something that stops something good from happening, that's where the biggest problems happen. Like, it would be easy for me to make a mistake and be embarrassed and be like, "Kyle, listen, let's just do this another day. Like, I don't like this." But it's like, you just gotta keep moving. And one of your
Yeah.
things is you said that mistakes are inevitable and they're good. And I believe this stems from the idea that if you keep going, good things will happen. What do you think?
Yeah, dude, they're fuel for growth, right? They're fuel for like, I want to go back to something you said a lot earlier, and I can't help but go back to it. I'm paraphrasing, but you said like, you don't know what the hell you're doing, right?
Mm.
Neither do I. None of us do. Nobody's figured this shit out. Nobody has figured this thing called life out. Some of us are less stressed about it, maybe a little better at this versus that, but nobody's figured it out. So, so for me to be like, and I'm going to marry that with something else you mentioned, imposter syndrome. I, man, I've sold more books than I ever expected to sell, and I've done things, and I realize it sounds arrogant, but there's a point to it. I've done things that I never in my wildest dreams would have dreamt that I would be able to achieve. I still struggle with imposter syndrome. I still don't know what the hell I'm doing, but I do know that every misstep, failure, accident, whatever, is the wrong path. Okay, so I have fewer options, which mean the remaining
Yeah,
options are likely better. It's like everything in life. I just so strongly believe most things in life are the product of overcoming one or more challenges. Um, but everything in life is an opportunity to make a choice down path A, B, C, or whatever. And if we happen to know that some of those paths are riddled with more errors and issues than others because of our experiences, well, isn't that a good thing? We want to go down the path that is, has less of those challenges, road bumps, hurdles, whatever the word is. But my point is I just feel like whether it's a mistake, um, or however you want to categorize it, a setback at the time is, if you view it as such, is an opportunity to be better on the other side of that. Listen, man, I'll share this with you, and I don't talk about it a lot, but before I left corporate America to write my book, I left a firm in not so great terms, and I was really down on myself that I wasn't able to accomplish some of the stuff that I wanted to accomplish there. But looking back 4 years later, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. I never would have written my book, never would have created this speaking business that I do now, but it all came out of one of the biggest setbacks and disappointments of my whole career. I didn't know it at the time, but I was determined to turn it into something else. And it was, did I know what I was doing? Absolutely not. But I just knew that I had to learn from this and get better. Wherever that took me is where it would take me. I just think it's a really important thing that you pointed out, man. It's when we recognize mistakes are really opportunities for growth, and we capitalize on them and not just wilt because of them, you're going to come out stronger and better for that effort. It's just irrefutable in my mind.
Yeah. Well, Kyle, I appreciate you sharing that with me.
Of
I know
course.
one of the things that I remember looking into is you said that your mission is ridding corporate America of its toxic ways. So
Yeah,
if
man.
you were like this magical person, which maybe in a way you are, if you're this magical person overseeing all these things, what are some things that you would do? What are some implementations you'd make to make corporate America less toxic?
Yeah, that's a long list as well. I need everybody who is in a position of authority to take on a little self-reflection and ask those, questions similar to the ones I mentioned earlier. What's it like to be led by me? Did I make
Mhm.
good on my commitments yesterday? Um, one of my filters is, and my mother passed away over a dozen years ago. Is, will my mom be proud of the way I handled that interaction yesterday? Did I treat somebody with the respect that they deserved, or did I allow my business card to kind of sway how I behave because I can get away with it? So we got to start with that self reflection, and out of that self reflection usually comes a list of opportunities to be better. Um, and when we can almost file those opportunities in a way that shows us the action required for that to stop happening, like for example, I was the shredder, right? You talked about that earlier. For me to get to that point of being the shredder, I had to recognize I wasn't good for details. Like, I never obsessed over details. I was one of these guys that just kind of flew so fast. Yeah. We'll get to that. It's not a big deal. It's a rounding error, or maybe this typo. Like, I didn't really operate that way until I realized the level of details that I promote within my teams, within my organization, is going to be played back to me. So we have to obsess over details if I expect those around me to obsess over details. Where I'm going with this, though, we can't rely on our mission statements and our corporate values. You walk into any company, you'll see integrity, accountability, teamwork. I don't know what those words mean in the real world. I don't know what that means if I'm on a team of 10 or I'm a team of 1 and I got a customer staring and screaming at me. I don't know what that means. But what I do know is we embrace challenge. I know what that means. I know what that looks like. So
Yeah.
so establishing the very, very clear behavioral standards to combat some of those shortcomings that you've identified in this questions, not just the shortcomings in your own leadership, but the shortcomings in the team. A lot of teams have a hard time keeping commitments to one another. And we talk about teamwork. Like, that's the value on the wall, teamwork. Well, if we're really focused on teamwork, then we wouldn't miss our deliverables to one another, our to-dos for one another. But if on the wall says we measure ourselves by outcomes, not activity, well, that's pretty important. Or if we say what we're going to do and then we do it, if that's one of our core principles, then the next time that you didn't deliver something to me that you'd committed to deliver to me, I'm not going to look at this word called teamwork. I'm going to say, hey, no, we've all subscribed to these 10 Wheeze things, and one of them is we say what we're going to do and then we do it.
Yeah.
That's a long-winded way of saying we can't expect people to show up to work and behave in a certain way if we haven't really been specific on the ways that we want them to behave. And if you find somebody that doesn't want to be a part of a team that's known for doing the right thing, leading by example, taking action, doing what we say, all the way to we number 10, then you don't want them anyway. But we often, almost all of us, fail to identify the very, very clear, observable standards for behavior that we expect from others. And we just expect them to behave like robotic professionals. And I just think that's naive. But when we set those standards and we live them ourselves every single day, and we own it when we slide and don't own it, when we don't behave like that, we create space for others to follow us because at that point they see it's genuine.
Kyle,
Start
my
there.
last question to you. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was my last question to you. I've really enjoyed asking this to my guests because it's very interesting what they think. But let's say theoretically, all of, we'll say all of your book, all of your podcasts were erased from the internet, and
Mm.
people didn't really know who Kyle was,
Mm.
but you can leave one message to every single person to change the most people's lives. What would that message be?
Ooh. You know, I'm a guy that takes a lot of pride in authenticity. Um, because to me, the word you could, dude, you could call me just about any insult you can think of, and it's not going to impact. It's not going to bother me at all, except hypocrite.
Hmm.
Um, and when I think of hypocrisy, I think of double standards, and do as I say, not as I do. What's good for you is not good for me, and vice versa. And that is a bad. That's a bad place to be in all aspects of life, not just the workplace. If you're known for saying one thing and doing another. So I would say be you, be authentically you. And if you're in an environment where that's not embraced, you should question if that's the right environment for you. Now, I'm not naive, dude. We have to conform in certain ways to be inside of an organization. Everybody has their own stick inside the company. I get that. But if it is kind of suppressing your individuality, your diverse perspectives, the things that make you you, before you start to become this corporate robot, the kind that you and your fraternity brothers loathe, you need to find a place that's going to allow you to be your very best. And I won't bullshit you. Those are fewer in number than those that require you to kind of conform to how they want you to be. But I just think authenticity, you be you, and I don't know that how that can ever serve you wrong. Yeah.
Kyle, tell the people where they can find you. Any links, any shout outs, the floor is yours.
What's your answer to that same question though?
Oh, that's a good question. Right back at me.
Yeah, man.
I think that if you are unforgivably yourself, the things that affect a lot of people negatively don't affect you as much. And I'll give you an example. So,
Yeah.
a lot of, well, at least I was talking to you a little bit about my book. It's about how to turn everyday conversations into life changing connections. And a big premise of that, my first chapter was about curiosity. I think curiosity is the prerequisite to any amazing conversation. Like you can't people always say, yeah, you want to be a good listener, you want to ask good questions, but how are you going to do any of these things if you're not curious about the other person,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So in the same way, a lot of times we conform and we say like, "Oh, like how's your day? Did you watch the football game?" All of these things. And when people don't really want to connect with us, want to be friends with us, it always is kind of tough because it's like, dang, like I feel lonely. One of the statistics I know is 1 in 6 people feel lonely in the world, which is
Yeah.
1.37 billion people. So
Yeah.
for those people, I wish more people were okay saying, listen, what I do over the weekend, I crocheted for 2 days. That was my favorite thing.
Yeah.
Because I think when you're not afraid to be who you are, you find so many more people like you. And this is something that I've noticed recently with I used to be embarrassed of the fact that I had a podcast because having a podcast sometimes gets a bad rep. Oh, like you have a podcast. I mean, that's pretty cool. Like, whatever, people have something to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
But the more that I started to tell people about my podcast, about my goals with it, who I talk to, they're like, oh my God, I listened to a podcast kind of similar, and this is what this person was saying. I found so many people that were so like-minded that I I wish I could have saved 4 years of my life finding those people.
Gosh. What a great answer, man. What a great answer. You ever think about or struggle with imposter syndrome?
Yeah, 100%. Especially as somebody who is younger and trying to do big
That's why
things,
I asked. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you deal with it?
I don't know, to be honest.
Yeah.
I will say
Fair.
one thought that helps me is
Yeah.
everybody's kinda just a person. Like
Yeah.
we're all kind of the same, but
Yeah.
I will be honest, when the thoughts are kind of flowing through me, when I'm like, "Who am I to do this thing? Who am I
Yep.
to write this book?" For
Yep.
example, I'm like,
Yep.
"Yeah, everybody's people, but I'm a 21-year-old person, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
a hard answer, I'll be honest.
yeah. I didn't know what even if you had the answer, it's still hard.
Yeah.
Uh, when I decided to write my first book, I remember talking to a friend of mine, a friend, not a casual acquaintance, a friend, and for months, I didn't tell anybody that I was writing the book. I didn't tell my wife for the first month, and I finally started to tell people, and one of my buddies said, "Who's gonna read a book from you?" And he didn't say
Yeah,
it in an insulting way. He was just like, "Seriously, Kyle, who's" and I said, "I don't know, Chris. We're gonna find out." But I was like, "Wow, that kinda stung."
yeah,
Uh, and so you have probably gone through those same emotions and experiences. I actually think it's not a bad thing. I don't think imposter syndrome is if it's crippling, obviously. You know Ray Dalio? Do you follow him at all?
yeah, yeah.
Ray Dalio said in Principles, if you're worried about whatever, if you're worried, you probably don't need to be worried. If
Mhm.
you're not worried, you
You probably
probably need
should
to
be
be
worried.
worried.
Yeah,
Right, and I think that's when I think about imposter syndrome, it's like, well, I feel this imposter syndrome because 'cause I'm worried about being so good at something or maybe for the wrong reasons, but, I think if you can harness that imposter syndrome into energy to create a better product or service or whatever it is you're trying to do, then can't be a bad thing, right?
yeah, because I feel like it's also intended that if you're struggling with imposter syndrome, you're doing something that is way outside your comfort zone, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, in a way, it could be positively framed. I love that.
There's
That's
growth in that,
awesome.
right? Hey, one
Yeah,
last question for
100%.
you before I answer your last one.
Sure.
When you talked about being I think you used the word soul sucking. For the corporate environment, or I forget exactly how you framed it. You remember the part when you said that earlier?
Yeah, I can even think about it right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanna learn more about that. Say more, because you're probably not alone. I bet your buds probably have a similar like, tell me more about what you think about when you think of corporate America.
Yeah, 100%. First of all, I will say before I answer that question, it's funny because you talked about conforming, and I have a lot of my really close friends, they have the same thoughts as me, but they conform when
Yeah,
they're in the environment, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
when I think about, obviously it's hard, like corporate America, or when I think about like my schema of corporate America, it's kind of like, and I guess I learned some of this from my dad because I see how he like navigates it, but I always get a little bit of a bad representation of it just from the, like, thought of, first of all, only small talk, corporate talk. It's like you don't really get to know people, which is one of my biggest things. I love learning about people, and it's hard to
yeah,
know somebody when
yeah,
all he does is saying they ask me about KPIs or all these different things,
yeah.
right? So that's the first thing. Another thing is, um,
Inauthentic is basically what you just described. Surface
yeah,
level.
exactly,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly. I would say like the rule of command where it's like, oh, these people are these big scary creatures because they're in control of your job, and if you mess up and all these things, you're gonna be the one that has to pay the price for it.
yeah,
I
yeah,
would say those are probably my big two, but also just the idea that it incentivizes the wrong things. It's all about the bottom line. It's all about, no,
yeah,
why would you want to fail in this thing when you can succeed and we can save so much time? Why we should optimize this so it's not necessarily you taking 5 tries and us spending $75,000, but you trying it once and us making $30,000, right?
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
kinda what I think about.
yeah. I tell you what, brother, the second part of your answer about this body of these senior people, uh, that's what I'm trying to fix, man. That's
I
what I'm
love
trying
it.
because I said it earlier, there's nobody named company. There's nobody named management
I like
or
that.
leadership
Yeah,
or corporation. There's
yeah,
a dude up there or a woman up there. They're real humans who probably had the same insecurities that all of us had coming up
yeah,
and still struggle with the same imposter syndrome that we just talked about. So that's and I'm just so convinced because when I made that shift from being that guy that, the shredder, the people that people fear, when I made that transition, my work became so much more impactful on my being, not just like between the hours of 8 and 5, man. And the connections that you make, that they last way longer than the tenure of the role that you're in. But the way you frame that just reminded me that's my mission is that we shouldn't think of these senior people inside of organizations as anything different than us because they either wore the exact same shoes that we wore to get to the seat that they're in today, or we don't want to work with them because they're not the human being that we can relate to be our best. So anyway, I wanted you asked so many good questions, man. But as you asked those questions and as you interjected, it made me think of because you're at a really unique point in your life, especially doing what you do, which is not normal. Grinding the way that you grind to put this show together is just really commendable, man. So I wanted to see what your thought process was for some of those same questions.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell the audience where they can find you.
Yeah, so I'm at, essentially every social media platform with the same handle. It's Kyle McDowell Inc. My website is kylemcdowellinc.com, and you've been so gracious to bring it up a number of times. My first book is Begin with We: 10 Principles for Building and Sustaining a Culture of Excellence. It's available wherever books are sold, audiobook, Kindle, all that. It's all out there. And I use those social media platforms, man, not for vanity purposes, but to engage with, usually to direct messages. Like I get a lot of questions about posts or people just reaching out who's maybe watched the podcast, and I'm grateful to share those platforms with you and in your audience because I use them. I use them to talk to people, which is really fun. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. To all my listeners, all of Kyle's links will be in the show notes, including his book. Go check it out. It's an absolutely amazing read. And thank you for listening all the way through. I will see you guys next Tuesday.